Hello, witches. It has been a long time, and I'm sorry. I had technical problems. We've had, well, basically, we had a really difficult time around Christmas, but it triggered a really big decision for our family, and I'll have more news on that soon, but I'm not quite going to go into it yet. But I wanted to finally do my video on the hair cord to connect with ancestors. So before I start the video, I want to remind you that I'm not qualified to guide anyone else on what to do except for giving my own experience and suggestions for you to take from as someone who is adopted and a witch. I just wanted to make that clear so that people were very aware that I have experience in mental health and I've advocated for people and things like that, but I have no qualifications in counselling, in spiritual guidance, anything like that. I do feel spiritually called to do this series, but there's no certificate I can hold up, which is much like my witchcraft, really. You know, there's no qualification I have for that except for practicing it. And these are all just really suggestions of things that I found useful to do or useful to consider. So I encourage you to discard whatever you like of what I say and just use what you find useful. So this ritual is to create a cord that can be used to make use of that link between you and your ancestors. It can be used for both spirit ancestors, ancestors of blood. I use one cord for both. However, you could make two. You could also create a similar cord to help detach yourself from a family member if you are absolutely sure that that is something you wish to do. If I was using it to detach myself, I would destroy it in some way at the end, either ritually cutting it or perhaps burning it or burying it, depending on the materials I used and how I wanted that connection to end. So I chose to include hair in the ancestral cord. You may need to replace this if you don't have hair, if you know, it feels wrong to you, or anything, you know, if it just doesn't feel like something that is going to work for you. But first I'm going to explain my reasons for using hair as I was guided to. So I've always found if you're going to replace something in a spell or a ritual or creation of a magical object, and my timer keeps going off at the moment. We're having a lot of weird things going on at the moment. I'm not sure why, so I apologise for that. It's really bizarre. Anyway, so yes, if you're going to replace something, I think it's really, really valuable to know why it was used, because it helps you to know what you're trying to replace and the properties of it, so you can think what else might be appropriate. So the idea of weaving hair into the cord comes from the idea that our hair shaft contains our DNA, which is a strong link to us. But the hair is also highly affected by the environment. So that's your exposure to your own life. Although it only grows for 2 to 6 years, and so is recent in that sense, I feel it's deeply a part of the person as it's created by their own physical form, and yet it can also be modified by cutting, dyeing, covering, curling, and so on, in the way that they wish to. And in this way, we can use it to communicate something about ourselves to the outside world. So in some ways, it's thought to protect our scalps, but it doesn't offer full protection against the sun, as a lot of people think it does. But some studies have found that it offers some protection against things like invasive melanoma. So there is a link to protecting our vessel, the body that keeps us on the physical plane, just as there is with the ancestors. So hair is not just of us, but of our environment, and we know that people who are not internally using drugs, for example, but are exposed to them via smoke in their environment, will have these drugs in their hair. Trace elements of hair also differ depending on our locality, which I thought was really fascinating. as we are connecting with ancestors, not necessarily of blood, but of spirit as well, this representation of influence and environment was something I felt was really important. Even if we don't bother much with our hair at all, it still communicates something about ourselves and our personality and our thoughts and feelings to the outside world. The idea of hair being an aspect of our communication, I thought was a really strong symbol, because I believe that whether we acknowledge it or not, ancestors are there, and their power is there. We're influenced by them, and our hair is created by us, just as we are created by our ancestors. Whether this is, spiritual, inspirational, genetic, love, or legal link. And the way that our hair is influenced by all of these genetics and these environmental influences and what we like and dislike, our personality. And yet it's also just completely and entirely ours. So before I do the ritual, I tend to take guidance from my spirits in divination, in dream or trance. That might be purely taking advice from my ancestors, or it might be that I take advice from my other spirits that I work with as well. So I then make this space sacred, or allow it to know that it's being treated as sacred, and I build up energy and call my spirits. We all have our own ways of doing this, so just do that your own way. I know for witches, hello, sorry, it's my cat. I know for witches who are earlier on their path, saying do it your own way isn't always that helpful, but there are better videos than mine that detail kind of the raising, directing, manipulating of energy, or allowing spaces to know that you're treating them as sacred. And I do think there is a difference between the idea of creating a sacred space and allowing an area to know it's being treated as sacred, because I believe that all nature is sacred. It's not used to humans treating it as so anymore. So as my perspective is a witch who does believe in spirits, I call those I work with, but some might prefer to connect purely to their personal power, still through similar means like sigil work, ritual movement like beating your chest or dancing or meditation, but it's just dependent on your personal practice. So once the space is set and spirits are called, weave a cord, adding your hair into it as you go. I do this by pulling some of my hair out before the ritual in sacred space. You could cut it, but for me that shaft is important. So cut hair carries slightly different properties to pulled hair, as far as I feel. If you want to use quite a good amount, you can split this over a good few days, because you don't want it to be painful or to end up bald. Use fibres like wool, cotton, ribbon, leather, nettle, thin strips of fur, anything that kind of holds that deep connection for you, that feels ancestral, or that you have been guided to use by your ancestors. I do want to remind here that a lot of online rituals, and even published books actually, encourage the use of products that aren't eco-friendly and are actually really harmful to the environment. So please try to use products that are not damaging to the environment. Think of materials that speak to you about your ancestry, but be canny about what you're using and what effect that is having on the earth. So plait these bits of material or ribbons, etc. Wrap them, knot them, move your hair into them as you go. If you're plaiting or wrapping or tying, you can put the cord on a table and put a heavy object on the top of it in order to pull it taut and make it a bit easier to do. You might choose to tie things into this cord that represent you and your connection to your ancestors, as well as individual ancestors themselves, perhaps, or greater representations of kind of ancestral groups. You might choose to scent it with something that helps you connect to your ancestors, or to add sort of bells and feathers and bones and dried herbs and baby teeth. If you have a small object belonging to an ancestor, this could be ideal, something like a brooch or an earring perhaps. You might choose to add something which you can alter depending on the ancestor you're calling, like a perfume ball or a lightweight locket. You might add herbs that aid in manifesting, or a tiny bottle of grave dirt from the graves of your ancestors. Make sure that it is a workable cord and it's able to be used as you want it to be used, and be as creative as you like within that kind of remit. As a side note on length, I'd say the length is of preference really, because it's not the traditional witch's measure, but a separate ancestor cord. So you might have a strong feeling about length, and if you do so, then pursue that. But in my experience, it's just best to keep it workable, and kind of be purpose driven in what you're making. So sing your soul songs, your songs of power. Sing over the cord songs of those whom you wish to connect to. If you wish to connect with witches of old, you may have them come to you in a dream or a vision and give you a song that they wish you to sing. If you don't, you might wish to kind of sing songs from their time period perhaps, or again with nature or animal spirits, you might already know their power songs, and if you do, then sing that over them. If there are family songs that you kind of use as a family, perhaps you sing them together at family gatherings often, or perhaps they are kind of ancestrally played at funerals or christenings, or anything similar to that, then sing those over the cord. I think it can also be really nice to speak poetry over it that awakens it and that tells the cord what you wish it to do. I find focusing on memories of the times that I have been kind of powerfully affected by the special people or beings that I'm making the cord for and to connect to is a really powerful way of accessing the power that I wish to direct. So taking yourself back to that time and calling back the strength or the hope or the emotion that you felt at that moment. I know that personally I respond really strongly to scent. So if I want to invoke feelings in myself, I might use a perfume from the time, or put on a leather jacket that I was wearing, or bring to mind the smell of tobacco that the person next to me was smoking. I might play music that I could hear at the time, or call to mind the sound of the wind raging in the trees. I might purposefully make the same journey I made that day that I was strongly affected by an ancestor. I might make it physically back to that place that was special, or I might choose to only do that in my mind. I definitely call up the face of ancestors that I can put a face to. I find an expression on a face can move me deeply, but if I don't have that person's face, then I just concentrate on the feelings basically that they bring up in me. So you kind of immerse yourself into those memories and feelings and experiences, and try to almost add that into the cord. So if you don't have memories of physically being with an ancestor, it can be as simple as, reading about someone and having enlightenment dawn on you, or performing a spell and feeling strongly connected to the witches of old, or dreaming of someone who guided you. So I would call upon the ancestors who I wish to connect to at the very beginning of the weaving. You kind of do that in the way that you've been guided, and there isn't a right or wrong way. I do think there's a difference between unplanned but guided spells, which is kind of spirit-led ritual, comparatively to someone just having a go and not really knowing what they're doing. So just be wary that, be wary that you don't want to necessarily do exactly the same as other people, but at the same time, it's better to seek guidance from someone than just to kind of have a go at something you're not comfortable with yet. So you might wish to create an incense blend that helps with calling the ancestors, and some people might actually use a calling incense and an incense at the end to kind of signal that they might be going, or their presence is no longer needed within that. It depends on your views, really. And remember, knowing uses of herbs, like whether a herb helps to aid spirits in manifesting, helps to ground them, or perhaps a herb for yourself to help you see them or receive them in some way better, can be really important. And I think experimenting with those herbs at different times when you're trying to connect with ancestors can be really useful. Same goes for crystals and things like that. I definitely suggest doing divination on what to use and ask ancestors yourself. Witchcraft is really such a unique path that there's a huge benefit in taking knowledge from witches who are more experienced. But I actually think if you're guided by spirits you trust, then that spirit work is a much more crucial aspect than what's written or what other people are telling you. But that's just my opinion, of course. Or perhaps be in that place of nature you're calling them from. So if you feel like me that your deepest ancestor is the sea, or perhaps that you connect kind of the earth as your deepest ancestor, and this cord also connects to them, then you can make it at that place in nature and work with that natural force to create it. So ask the ancestors to direct their energy into the cord and create that connection, and feel their energy coming through and joining your own, and connecting through the cord. So the directing of energy and opening of that doorway, for lack of a better word, is crucial, and I would direct the energy as I make the cord. I kind of would be doing that the entire time right up until the end of the ritual. So again, different people have different ways of bringing things to life or bestowing power on them, and I work a lot with breath, but others might use dye, or they might pound it with their hands or pass it through a space such as a hole in a rock. Some might use blood or menstrual blood, and many people will use like a combination of those really to help direct power or give life to it. So choose the ways that really speak to you, and if you've got a way that is kind of ancestrally linked to you, then that might be worth looking into, because the handing down of traditions is a really, really crucial part of honouring your ancestors. So if you're blessing it in the same way that they bless something else, that can have a very powerful effect. Personally, I bless it at the end, and though it's a multifaceted blessing, I tend to spray water from my mouth across some things to bless them. So this way the sacred water mixes with my own saliva. And I also use saliva to bless at certain times, and also to heal or to curse. So in this case, it's more a link to myself as blood is, and connected to keeping those pathways open with my ancestors. But it also seals the power in and aids in that giving of life. So if you don't want to do that, then you don't need to, just do it your way. If you have a candle you use to connect to the ancestors, you could pass it over the flame and bless it. there are so many ways to use this cord to connect to your ancestors. So you can use it as almost like a rosary or prayer beads, as a literal line to like trace back all the way to where you want to be using each bead or bone or charm. You can make a really long cord that you can walk kind of for meditation purposes, or you know, that kind of thing to aid in trance with your ancestors. You can use a light one to dance with, or a thin one that you can connect the ends of and wear as a necklace outside of ritual. You can wrap it about yourself to connect to ancestors. I choose my stomach for blood ancestors, and my chest for those of spirit or love. Kind of, it represents the umbilical cord and the cords of the heart. So you can dance with it to actually bring the ancestors into your sacred space, and wrap it around your hand and a pen and let their words come through. You can use it as a blindfold as part of a trance to bring visions from them. You can use it if it is something that is able to go in water. You can use it to stir a divination bowl. You can use it to bring their healing and wrap it around ailments, and also tools to bestow blessing. You can use it to comfort you and draw on their power when you're upset as well. So I really hope that this video has been helpful, and I really hope to be back again soon. Bye guys. Oh, here's the cat. Hey darling. Bye guys.